This is a formal House of Representatives hearing. A member of Congress from Georgia's 12th District spoke on H.R. 5184, the Affordable Homes Act, discussing inflation, rising housing costs, and federal housing regulations. Here is the hearing footage.
At this time, I want to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia's 12th District.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank my friend from Ohio for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 5184, the Affordable Homes Act. Mr. Speaker, for many years, including when I first got started in my career in the construction industry, buying and owning a home was reachable in a significant achievement for American workers. In fact, just 6 years ago, it was achievable. But unfortunately, in today's economic conditions, many young Americans are realizing that the dream of home ownership has become just that, a dream. This all happened in the 4 years of the Biden-Harris administration. In fact, if you were born after 1982 in this country, you had never seen inflation before. Created high interest rates. These people don't know what they're talking about. Like I said, I come from the business world. I lived through these last 4 years, and it has been devastating to this country. And what we're trying to do here is turn the tide. For example, in the state of Georgia, the average home is valued at over $320,000, and just 6 years ago, you could buy that home for $250,000. It is just simply out of reach for countless young families. Under current law, the Department of Housing and Urban Development and the Department of Energy have the authority to set energy efficiency standards for manufactured homes. Authorizing two federal agencies to accomplish the same goal only serves to create conflicting standards and confusion, overcomplicating the regulatory process for builders and making it more difficult to construct and ultimately purchase affordable homes. We're listening to the housing industry, folks. Mr. Speaker, with my over 40 years of experience in the construction industry, I can tell you firsthand and just how overbearing and expensive and burdensome federal regulations can be. Let's listen to the American people. Let's listen to the people that build these homes.
Mr. Speaker, I yield the gentleman 30 more seconds.
The gentleman is recognized for another 30 seconds.
The Affordable Homes Act, offered by my friend Representative Houchin, is a common-sense bill that removes duplicative housing regulations and will decrease housing costs in America. Specifically, it eliminates DOE's authority to issue energy standards for manufactured houses, while maintaining HUD's full regulatory authority. In doing so, we will streamline the standard-setting process, which will lower the cost of manufacturing housing. We should be able to agree in Congress that we need to take this action to address rising costs. I strongly urge a yes vote on H.R. 5184, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back.
Representative Rick Allen stood on the House floor back in January 2026, and he didn't hold back. He made a pretty blunt accusation, actually. He said the Biden administration's regulations had basically turned homeownership into this impossible dream for millions of young Americans. And look, the numbers back him up. In his home state of Georgia, average home values jumped from $250,000 just 6 years ago to over $320,000 today. That's a massive jump. Inflation, high interest rates. Families were getting squeezed from every angle. But here's the thing Allen pointed out, and this is where it gets interesting. He said the problem wasn't just market forces. No. According to him, with over 40 years in the construction industry, the real problem was regulatory chaos coming straight out of Washington. Now, what made Allen's moment particularly revealing wasn't just those numbers he threw out. It was what he exposed about how two federal agencies, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, that's HUD, and the Department of Energy, DOE, how these two had basically created this bureaucratic collision course. And guess who paid the price? The people trying to buy the most affordable housing option out there. Manufactured homes. Here's the thing. You don't need to agree on energy policy or pick a political side to understand why this regulatory conflict actually matters. So Allen laid out this specific problem. Both HUD and DOE claimed authority to set energy efficiency standards for manufactured housing. The result? Duplicative regulations. Confusing regulations that actually contradicted each other. Builders didn't know which rules to follow. Compliance costs went through the roof. Think about it this way. When manufacturers are facing conflicting federal mandates, one agency says, use this insulation standard. Another agency says, no, use that one. Where does that cost end up? Right in the lap of homebuyers. For families already struggling with affordability, that regulatory tug-of-war meant the difference between owning a home and being locked out of the market entirely. And this regulatory overlap, it didn't just pop up by accident. It traces back to a 2022 Biden administration rule that gave DOE expanded authority over manufactured housing energy standards. The Department of Energy came in and issued requirements for additional insulation, tighter air sealing in manufactured homes, standards that went way beyond what HUD had already established. Now, proponents said, hey, these standards will save families money on utility bills over time. Fair point. But critics, including Allen and the manufactured housing industry, they countered with, yeah, but the upfront cost increases are making homes completely unaffordable from the start. So that's where H.R. 5184 comes into the picture. It's called the Affordable Housing Over Mandating Efficiency Standards Act. Kind of a mouthful, so they shortened it to the Affordable Homes Act. Representative Aaron Houken from Indiana introduced this bill, and the goal is pretty straightforward. Eliminate DOE's authority to issue energy standards for manufactured houses while keeping HUD's full regulatory control intact. Allen championed this legislation as essential regulatory streamlining. His argument was simple. By ending this dual authority system, Congress could actually lower manufacturing costs and restore some clarity to an industry that was basically paralyzed by contradictory federal mandates. But let's zoom out for a second, because this exchange didn't happen in a vacuum. It's happening against the backdrop of a nationwide housing affordability crisis that's, honestly, reached historic proportions. By late 2025, 46% of Americans, that's almost half the country, reported that the cost of living was the worst they could ever remember. Ever. Housing costs. Second most challenging expense for families right after groceries. In Metro Atlanta alone, housing affordability took a nosedive in suburban and exurban areas between 2019 and 2024. And this wasn't just an Atlanta thing. It was mirroring patterns nationwide. Mortgage interest rates were hovering around 6.3% in early 2026, which just made homeownership even more out of reach for working families. Now, manufactured housing. It used to be called mobile homes, and people looked down on it. But today, it's actually a critical segment of affordable housing stock. It represents one of the few remaining options for low-income and middle-class buyers. About 100,000 manufactured homes are sold in the United States every year. And here's something interesting. More than half already meet or exceed DOE's 2022 efficiency standards. But the regulatory uncertainty created by this overlapping authority, it's chilled production and innovation in the whole sector. What Allen did in that moment was reframe the entire debate. He didn't frame it as energy policy versus housing access. He framed it as regulatory sanity versus bureaucratic duplication. He emphasized that federal mandates, no matter how well-intentioned they might be, they impose real costs on real families. And when agencies pursue overlapping missions without any coordination, the burden falls on the least powerful people, the builders who face compliance nightmares, and the families who can't afford the resulting price increases. So against that backdrop, the Affordable Homes Act passed the House on January 9, 2026. The legislation rescinds DOE's May 2022 Manufactured Housing Energy Efficiency Rule and restores sole regulatory authority back to HUD. Supporters argued this would provide the regulatory certainty needed to boost housing production. Opponents, especially energy efficiency advocates, they warned that rolling back these standards could saddle low-income families with higher utility bills and poorly insulated homes for decades to come. That distinction? It's not just semantic. It's the dividing line between viewing housing policy through the lens of regulatory authority or lived affordability. Look, democracy doesn't collapse all at once over housing regulations, but it does erode quietly when agencies pursue contradictory mandates that price families out of homeownership. When a construction worker from Georgia can no longer afford to buy the kind of home he once built, something fundamental has broken in the system. When young Americans look at $320,000 home prices and 6% interest rates, and just see an impossible barrier. That's not just an economic failure. It's a democratic one. If you believe that housing policy should serve families rather than bureaucratic turf battles, then this moment deserves your attention. Staying informed about how regulatory conflicts drive up costs. That's how accountability survives. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video, because understanding the mechanics of affordability is honestly the first step toward fixing it.